Have you ever been looked at like you didn't belong, even when you had every right to be there? Imagine sitting quietly in your seat, holding a valid ticket, doing everything right, and still being told to move because someone decided you couldn't possibly belong in that space. Now ask yourself, what would you do? Argue, cry, walk away, just to avoid a scene? Or would you stay seated, calm but unshaken, and let the world expose its own injustice? This is the story of Dr. Ayanna Brooks, a black CEO, a woman of quiet strength who boarded a flight one morning and was humiliated before takeoff. What no one knew was that one phone call from her would ripple across an entire industry, freezing $1.3 billion in minutes and rewriting the rules of corporate accountability forever. But this isn't just about money or power. It's about dignity. It's about what happens when grace refuses to bow to ignorance. If you've ever been told you don't belong, this story is for you. Stay with us till the end. And if it moves you, please like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. The terminal at JFK was buzzing that morning, the usual chaos of coffee steam, rolling suitcases, and half-finished phone calls. Dr. Ayanna Brooks stood quietly near Gate 27, holding a boarding pass that read, Orion Airways Flight, OA217 Seat 2A, Business Class. She wasn't dressed like the others in the priority line. No designer scarf, no gold cufflinks, just a soft charcoal blazer. Her laptop tucked neatly under one arm, and a pair of old leather flats that had walked through more boardrooms than most of the men waiting beside her. She smiled politely when the gate agent looked up. "Morning," Ayanna said, handing over her pass. The woman, mid-40s, crisp bun, name tag. Reading Kendra Miles scanned the ticket, frowned, and then looked up with the kind of smile that isn't really a smile at all. "Ma'am, this is for business class," she said. Ayanna nodded. "That's correct." Kendra's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you sure sometimes corporate staff are issued upgrade passes that look similar? Is this for someone else?" There was no malice in her tone at first, just that slow drip of condescension that people use when they've already made up their minds. Ayanna inhaled softly. "It's for me." A pause stretched between them. People in line shifted, curious. One man glanced over his newspaper. Another woman tugged her rolling bag a little closer, as if this brief exchange might somehow inconvenience her. Kendra scanned the pass again, tapped a few keys, then sighed loud enough for the people behind Ayanna to hear. "Well, this seat is reserved for our platinum-level travelers. Are you sure you're in the right lane?" Ayanna tilted her head slightly, her voice steady but warm. "I'm right where I need to be." For a second, Kendra seemed unsure how to respond. Her smile faltered. She handed the ticket back, her nails tapping once against the counter. "Please wait to the side. I need to confirm this with my supervisor." Behind them, the line grew. Someone muttered, "Come on. Some of us have connections to make." Ayanna stepped aside without a word. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She'd been here before, not this gate, not this flight, but this moment. The subtle doubt that slides beneath the skin. She pulled out her phone and checked the time. 7:43 Her flight was scheduled to board in 12 minutes. Through the glass wall behind the gate, the Orion Airways insignia gleamed on the tail of the aircraft. She knew that logo better than most. She helped design it 10 years ago, when Orion was still a startup scrambling for funding. Back then, Ayanna had been the youngest black engineer ever to serve on an aerospace compliance board. Now she was CEO of Solaris Tech, one of Orion's largest investors, a 25% stakeholder, to be exact. But today, she wasn't here as a CEO. She was just another traveler, trying to make it home. Her phone buzzed once. A text from her assistant, Safe Travels, Dr. B. The FAA meeting moved to Thursday. She smiled faintly, slipped the phone back into her bag. When Kendra returned, she didn't make eye contact. "You can board now," she said curtly. Ayanna nodded and walked forward, scanning her ticket at the gate. As she stepped down the jet bridge, a quiet voice from behind carried just far enough for her to hear. Some people really think money can buy them anywhere. It wasn't loud, but it landed. Ayanna didn't turn around. She simply adjusted her blazer and kept walking. Inside the cabin, the air was cool, scented faintly with coffee and disinfectant. Seat 2A waited window side, second row. She placed her bag beneath the seat, adjusted the headrest, and took a long breath. Through the window, dawn light spilled over the runway, pale gold against the concrete. She looked out at it for a long time, her reflection faint in the glass. People always assume humiliation happens in shouting matches. But sometimes, it's a quiet thing, a collection of looks, pauses, and small words that tell you you don't belong. Ayanna closed her eyes. She had learned long ago that silence can be louder than anger. And on this flight, silence was going to speak volumes. The cabin doors clicked shut with a dull metallic sound, sealing in a hush that carried both comfort and tension. "Doctor?" Ayanna Brooks adjusted the seatbelt around her waist. Across the aisle, a man in a navy suit scrolled through stock updates on his phone. The faint glow of the screen reflected on his glasses. The hum of the engines began to rise, that steady vibration that always reminded her of power held in restraint. A flight attendant's polished shoes appeared beside her. Ayanna looked up. Kendra Miles stood there again. Her red lipstick was perfect, her expression composed but sharp. She scanned the seating chart on her tablet, then the face of the passenger in 2A, her brows knitting together. "Good morning again, ma'am," Kendra said with forced politeness. "Could I see your boarding pass one more time?" Ayanna felt the collective awareness of nearby passengers shift toward them. She reached calmly for the pass tucked into the seat pocket, handing it over without a word. The man in 2B paused his typing, eyes flicking toward them with interest disguised as indifference. Kendra stared at the pass longer than necessary. Seat 2A. Business class. Interesting. She smiled, but her tone carried a faint sting. "You must travel a lot?" "I do," Ayanna replied evenly. "On Orion." "Sometimes." Kendra tilted her head, clearly fishing for some detail to justify her suspicion. "And what line of work are you in?" The question hung there, soft but loaded. Ayanna folded her hands in her lap. Technology. Energy sector. Oh, renewable energy. Like solar panels. Something like that. Kendra gave a perfunctory nod, as if humoring a child's story. "Well, that's nice," she said. "I just need to make sure everything's in order before takeoff." She turned slightly, gesturing for another attendant, a younger woman named Talia Green, to come closer. Talia's eyes darted between them nervously. "Everything's fine, Miss Miles," she whispered. "Her ticket's valid. I checked it when she boarded." "I'll confirm anyway," Kendra replied curtly. Ayanna exhaled through her nose, watching the stewardess retreat toward the galley. She could have spoken then, could have ended it with a single sentence. "I'm a major shareholder of this airline." But she didn't. Her voice, her very presence, had always carried weight, and she had learned that power is often best measured by when you choose not to use it. The engines roared softly beneath them as the plane began to taxi. Outside, The runway lights shimmered like strings of amber beads stretching into dawn. The captain's voice came over the intercom, warm and routine. "Good morning, folks. This is Captain Monroe. We're second in line for departure. Estimated flight time to San Francisco is 5 hours and 30 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight with Orion Airways." Ayanna leaned back, closed her eyes for a moment, and let the hum settle into her chest. She tried to let go of the small sting from earlier. She'd promised herself, after years of boardroom wars and whispered dismissals, that she wouldn't let other people's narrowness define her peace. But then Kendra returned. "Ma'am," she said, voice firm this time, "I need you to come with me for a moment." Ayanna's eyes opened. "Is there a problem? There's been a discrepancy in the system. Your seat number doesn't match our manifest." "That can't be right," Ayanna replied. "Please," Kendra interrupted, "let's not make this uncomfortable." The words cut sharper than any shout could. The man in 2B shifted slightly, pretending to adjust his tie, pretending not to listen. A woman across the aisle looked up from her magazine, sensing the embarrassment unfolding like static in the air. Ayanna looked at Kendra for a long moment, then unbuckled her seatbelt slowly. "If there's an issue, I'm sure it can be cleared up right here." "I'd prefer if we discuss this in private," Kendra said, "near the galley." The tone wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in courtesy. Ayanna stood. The cabin lights caught the faint shimmer of the silver chain around her neck, a gift from her father when she defended her first doctoral thesis. "All right," she said softly. "Lead the way." As she followed Kendra down the narrow aisle, she caught a glimpse of Talia's face. The younger woman looked torn. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak but didn't dare. Ayanna gave a faint nod of reassurance. An unspoken, "It's all right." "Near the galley," Kendra turned abruptly, folding her arms. "Dr. Brooks, if that's your real name, I've seen this before. People using doctored passes, trying to sneak into premium cabins. It's not acceptable." Ayanna blinked once. "You think I forged my boarding pass?" Kendra crossed her arms tighter. "Let's just say it wouldn't be the first time someone tried to play the system. Play the system." The phrase echoed. Ayanna felt a flash of heat rise behind her ribs. Not anger, just disappointment, the kind that seeps in slowly. She spoke quietly, each word precise. "Ms. Miles, I purchased this seat like every other passenger here. If there's an error, it's on your end, not mine." Kendra's voice sharpened. "Don't get defensive. I'm calling security to verify. Please wait here." Ayanna stood still, eyes on the silver coffee pot behind Kendra, watching her own reflection tremble slightly with the vibration of the engines. "Do what you need to do," she said, when Kendra disappeared into the cockpit. Ayanna returned to her seat. The cabin felt colder now. Conversations were hushed. Even the hum of the plane seemed to pull back, waiting. Talia approached quietly, crouched beside Ayanna's seat. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. She's strict with protocol. It's not you." Ayanna turned to her, her gaze steady. "Protocol isn't the problem. Perception is." Talia hesitated. "Should I get someone from ground control?" "No," Ayanna said softly. "Not yet." The captain's voice came again over the speakers, a hint of tension creeping in. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been asked to hold position for a few minutes before departure. Thank you for your patience." Ayanna looked out the window. The horizon was turning gold, light spilling across the wings. She could see another plane lifting smoothly into the air, free, effortless. For a moment she wondered what it would feel like to exist without constantly having to prove the obvious that she belonged exactly where she was. Her phone, still set to silent, vibrated faintly against the tray table. She glanced down a message from Malcolm Reyes boarding. Complete, she typed back one word, almost. Then she slipped the phone into her pocket, folded her hands, and stared straight ahead. The quiet around her wasn't fear, it was focus. She had spent her entire career building systems that held corporations accountable for their actions. She'd written codes that measured ethics, that rewarded transparency. Now, irony sat beside her, wearing a Navy uniform and a practiced smile. The seatbelt sign chimed again. Kendra returned, face pale, jaw tight. "Security is on standby," she said. "They'll sort this out before we take off." Ayanna looked up at her, expression calm, almost gentle. "Before you make that call, Ms. Miles," she said, "you might want to check who actually owns part of this plane." The attendant blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "What do you mean?" Ayanna simply smiled, then looked back out the window. "You'll see soon enough." Talia froze in the aisle, uncertain what she'd just witnessed, but aware that something had shifted. The cabin was still, heavy with anticipation. The engines idled. The lights flickered once, and far beyond the runway, in a building filled with glowing screens and streaming data, a red notification began to pulse on a dashboard that very few people in the world were authorized to see. At that exact moment, the flight attendant didn't yet know that a chain of events had already begun, one that would ripple across financial networks, regulatory systems, and every single gate bearing the Orion Airways logo. And Ayanna Brooks, seated quietly in 2A, closed her eyes as the engines fell silent. She didn't need to raise her voice. She never did. The aircraft remained still on the runway, its engines murmuring in low rhythm, like a restrained heartbeat waiting for permission to move. The announcement of a short delay floated through the cabin again, this time delivered with a faint tremor in the captain's tone. Passengers shifted in their seats, whispering to each other, frustration already beginning to bloom. But in seat 2A, "Doctor?" Ayanna Brooks sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the streaks of gold spilling across the horizon. The silence around her wasn't empty. It was dense, filled with the unspoken weight of judgment and expectation. Every minute stretched thin, each second adding to the invisible ledger of moments where she'd had to prove herself without saying a word. Kendra Miles stood near the galley, her arms folded tight against her chest. The small communication device clipped to her ear crackled faintly as she waited for a response from ground control. Beside her, the younger attendant, Talia Green, lingered with nervous energy, clutching a coffee carafe she hadn't yet poured. "Kendra," Talia began softly, "I really think you should let her be. She's not doing anything wrong." Kendra's eyes snapped toward her. "I'm following procedure. Don't tell me how to do my job." "But enough," Kendra hissed. "You don't know these situations like I do. People try to slip into premium cabins all the time. One small mistake, and I get blamed." Talia hesitated, lowering her gaze. "Maybe this isn't that kind of mistake." The older woman ignored her, staring down the aisle. From her position, she could see Ayanna's profile, the calm, unbothered tilt of her chin, the way she seemed to exist above the tension surrounding her. It unnerved her. People usually fidgeted when challenged. They explained themselves, argued, begged. But this woman, she did nothing, and that stillness felt like defiance. Ayanna turned a page in the report open on her lap. Her mind wasn't on the words, but on the strange quietness that had fallen over the plane. She could sense eyes glancing at her from time to time, darting away when she looked up. She could hear a child 2 rows back, asking his mother why the plane wasn't moving yet. And the mother's awkward reply, "They're just checking something. Honey." The minutes slid by. Ayanna took a slow breath and let it out, her composure a quiet performance of discipline. She'd learned it years ago at the start of her career, when every boardroom felt like an arena. The lesson was simple control, what they cannot take from you, your voice, your posture, your calm. Her phone buzzed again. She pulled it out discreetly and saw Malcolm's name flash across the screen. The message was short. "You good," she typed back. "Situation developing. Flight OA 267. Hold for my signal." Then she switched the device to airplane mode. The message sent just before the connection dropped. At the front of the plane, Kendra received a ping on her tablet. Her frown deepened as she skimmed through the latest update. For reasons she couldn't comprehend, her system had started to freeze seat assignments flickering, passenger details blurring. It was as if the flight's data feed was being quietly rewritten in real time. "What is happening with this thing?" she muttered, tapping the screen repeatedly. Talia leaned closer. "Could be a system sync issue. They were updating the network last week." "It's fine," Kendra snapped. "Just get me another coffee." When she turned back toward the cabin, she noticed Ayanna watching her. Not with hostility, not even with irritation, just watching. The kind of gaze that made her feel exposed, like someone had measured her without saying a word. Kendra looked away first. A soft chime announced another update from the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Monroe's voice came through, steady but strained. "We're experiencing a brief technical issue. We'll be underway shortly." Ayanna's reflection shimmered faintly against the window pane. She smiled to herself, not out of amusement, but understanding. The system was already stirring, the ripples beginning to reach places most people would never see. She leaned back in her seat, her fingers resting lightly against the armrest. "Calm," she whispered under her breath, a reminder more to herself than to anyone else. Across the aisle, the man in 2B finally spoke, his voice carrying that polished, performative curiosity that so often masks judgment. "Rough morning." "Huh." Ayanna turned slightly. "Pardon." He offered a tight grin. "You seem patient. Not sure I'd be that calm if I were being questioned like that." "I've had practice," she said, her tone even. He chuckled awkwardly. "Guess people overreact sometimes." She looked at him. Really looked. Sometimes they just react to what they think they see. The man's grin faltered. He nodded once and turned back to his screen, pretending to check his email. Moments later, Kendra returned. Her smile stretched thin. "Dr. Brooks, the system isn't verifying your seat assignment. It's possible your booking was processed incorrectly. I'll need to ask you to move until we can confirm." Ayanna's voice stayed measured. "My ticket is valid. You've already seen it twice." "I understand," Kendra said, "but the computer says otherwise. If you could just relocate to economy for now." A low murmur rolled through the cabin. A few passengers exchanged glances. The air felt electric, charged with a quiet discomfort that no one wanted to acknowledge aloud. Ayanna's eyes held steady on Kendra. Miles, I'll stay where I am." Kendra's jaw tensed. "Then I'll have to request assistance from airport security." The sentence dropped into the silence like a stone into deep water. Ayanna didn't blink. Her heartbeat didn't change its rhythm. "Before you do that," she said gently, "I'd like to make one call." Kendra hesitated. To who Ayanna reached for her phone, holding it low in her lap. "To my office." The attendant's frown deepened. "Ma'am, electronic devices." "It'll take 10 seconds, Ayanna said. Her fingers moved swiftly. The screen lit up with a secure app, Ethos Integrity Network. She entered her credentials, a faint green bar scrolling across the top as it connected to an encrypted channel. Kendra turned away to fetch the captain, muttering under her breath. The young attendant, Talia, leaned close once Kendra disappeared. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Are you okay, Doctor?" Brooks Ayana gave her a small, genuine smile. "Yes, Talia. Everything's going exactly as it should." The engines began to idle, the entire plane humming like a held breath. Somewhere far from that cabin, in a network of glass towers and data centers across the country, a digital key turned quietly in an invisible lock. Back on board, Ayana placed her phone face down on the tray table, folded her hands once more, and gazed out the window. The horizon shimmered. She remembered her father's words the night she took over Solaris Tech. When they test your worth, don't shout it. Show them where the ground shifts. She didn't need to explain herself to anyone. Not this time. Behind her, murmurs grew louder as the delay stretched past 30 minutes. Someone sighed audibly. Another passenger called out for water. The energy inside the cabin turned restless, like the sky before a storm. Kendra returned one final time, visibly uneasy. "We've been asked to hold until ground operations verify some data irregularities," she announced. Her voice trembled just slightly. "Please remain seated." Ayana didn't move. She simply smiled faintly and whispered to herself, "The ground's already moving." Outside, dawn fully broke over the tarmac. Light poured through the windows, soft and steady, like truth revealing itself 1 inch at a time. Inside seat 2A, the woman they doubted sat quietly, unbothered, knowing the tide had already begun to turn. The hum of the cabin deepened into uneasy quiet. The engines were still running, but it felt as if the plane itself was holding its breath. The passengers' chatter had faded to an anxious murmur, the kind that happens when people sense something bigger than a delay is brewing. In seat 2A, Dr. Ayana Brooks sat upright, eyes calm. Her hands folded neatly on the tray table. Her phone, still face down, pulsed once a faint vibration that nobody else noticed. At the other end of that invisible signal, hundreds of miles away in Washington, D.C., Malcolm Reyes sat inside the glass-walled conference room of Solaris Tech headquarters. His laptop glowed with rows of data from the Ethos Integrity System, the global ethics compliance network Ayana herself had helped design years ago. The system was used by corporate and government regulators to monitor accountability across multiple industries. He'd seen it trigger before, but never like this. A new alert blinked at the top of his screen. Priority override, Tier 1, initiated by Brooks. Malcolm's pulse quickened. He knew what that meant. Ayana wasn't just flagging an incident. She was invoking emergency review authority, something reserved for situations of systemic misconduct. He reached for his phone and dialed without hesitation. Ethos Control. This is Reyes. We have a live activation. Orion Airways, Flight OA217 JFK to San Francisco. Request immediate data capture. The response came fast. Clipped. All business confirmed. Network is syncing. Red protocol will initiate in under 5 minutes. He didn't smile. Didn't panic. He just stood, his mind already racing through the next steps. Meanwhile, back on the plane, Ayana watched through the window as the sunlight glimmered across the wing. The horizon burned gold, but her reflection in the glass remained steady, unflinching. Talia Green walked past slowly, her lips pressed tight, a silent question in her eyes. "What's happening?" Ayanna met her gaze and gave a small, reassuring nod. "Everything's fine," she murmured, though both of them knew it wasn't. Kendra Miles stood near the galley, tapping her foot impatiently, her comm device crackling with faint static. She'd been waiting for a response from ground security for nearly 15 minutes now. The delay irritated her, feeding the unease she didn't want to admit she felt. When the cockpit door opened, Captain Monroe stepped out, his expression tight. "Ms. Miles, what's the situation?" Kendra straightened. "We have a passenger in business class. Seat 2A. Her ticket isn't verifying in the system. I requested a ground check, but we haven't heard back." Monroe frowned. "We can't hold much longer. The tower's asking for status. I'm following protocol," she insisted. "Protocol doesn't explain why our flight manifest just disappeared from the server," he said, lowering his voice. "It's telling me Orion's database is in emergency lockdown." Kendra blinked. "Lockdown? That doesn't make sense. Neither does what's happening to our clearance codes." He stepped closer, his tone firm. "You'll stay with the passengers. No more calls to ground until we get clarity." Then he turned and walked back into the cockpit, leaving her standing frozen in place. Ayanna could hear part of their conversation from where she sat. Words like lockdown and server error carried easily through the cabin. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the rhythm of her heartbeat align with the quiet pulse of inevitability. In D.C. The Ethos Integrity dashboard turned red. The phrase "non-compliance suspected" Orion Airways flashed across every connected terminal. Within 60 seconds, the freeze began. 7 investment partners under the ESG consortium received automatic alerts. Transactions halted. $1 billion in pending credit lines turned from processing to hold. Internal auditors began scrambling, unaware of the full story. Malcolm took a steadying breath. He reached for the secure line and dialed the FAA's ethics division. "This is Reyes from Solaris Tech. I'm flagging a breach on OA217. Potential violation of passenger equity compliance under Section 4B. On the other end, a woman's composed voice replied. "Confirmed. Red review authorized. FOA liaison team en route." Malcolm looked out through the office window toward the Washington skyline, sunlight reflecting against the marble rooftops. He imagined Ayanna seated somewhere thousands of feet away, her silence unfolding like thunder no one could yet hear. Back inside the aircraft, the cabin lights flickered once, then steadied. Ayanna exhaled slowly, her calm unshaken. Kendra approached again, tablet in hand, her tone brittle. "Dr. Brooks, ground operations still can't confirm your booking. I'm going to have to ask you to disembark until this is sorted out." Ayanna turned her head, her eyes warm but steady. "You think removing me will fix your system?" Kendra hesitated. "This isn't personal." Ayanna tilted her head. "You're right. It's not. That's exactly why this is happening." For a second, Kendra looked genuinely confused. "Excuse me." But before she could demand an answer, the captain's voice broke through again over the speaker, sharper this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed to return to gate for further inspection. Please remain seated." The cabin filled with groans and whispers. A man muttered, "This airline's a mess," another said under his breath. "Probably a system hack." Ayanna didn't move. She could sense the weight of Kendra's frustration bearing down on her. But she wasn't angry. She was deliberate. Every step of this was unfolding exactly as it needed to. In the control tower, the Orion Airways operations feed flashed a priority message. Tier 1 incident detected. Ethics review in progress. The head of corporate security stared at the screen in disbelief. "What the hell's going on?" Another voice answered from behind him, uneasy. "It's coming from the Ethos network." "What's the trigger?" Passenger complaint. "Flight OA2 Chauvin." They all turned toward the same monitor at once. The incident log scrolling automatically, filed by Dr. Ayanna Brooks. Silence filled the room. One executive whispered, "She's one of our shareholders." The color drained from the security chief's face. "On the plane." Kendra's earpiece suddenly crackled to life with a voice from HQ. "Miles, stop all action immediately. Do not remove that passenger." Her blood ran cold. "What? Why? Repeat, do not engage. A federal review has been triggered. Cooperate fully." Kendra swallowed hard. For the first time that morning, her confidence faltered. She glanced toward Ayanna, who was now quietly sipping water as if none of this concerned her. Passengers began to rise, confused, some pulling bags from the overhead bins before being told to sit down again. The air felt charged something between fear and awe. Talia crouched next to Ayanna's seat, whispering, "What did you do?" Ayanna gave her a faint, tired smile. "I didn't do anything." "Talia, I just reminded the system to do its job." From the window, she could see airport vehicles approaching, lights flashing white and blue. She wasn't worried. This wasn't chaos, it was accountability. For years, she'd sat in rooms where executives spoke about diversity as a marketing term and ethics as a checkbox. She'd warned them, if systems can measure profit, they can measure prejudice. No one had listened closely enough until now. The engines powered down completely. The sudden stillness felt enormous. Kendra's voice came over the intercom, her tone strained but composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an unexpected directive from Orion Airways Operations, this flight will be temporarily delayed. Please remain calm as we await further instructions." Ayanna leaned back, almost closing her eyes. Somewhere in the distance, alarms she couldn't hear were sounding in boardrooms and trading floors. It wasn't revenge, it was reform, wrapped in silence and consequence. When she finally opened her eyes again, the sunlight had shifted, falling directly across her seat. She stared at her own reflection in the window and thought about the irony that people often mistake calm for weakness, when in truth, it's the strongest soundless language power can speak. At that moment, she felt no anger, only clarity. The machine she'd built to protect fairness was doing exactly what it was meant to do. The airport control tower at JFK flickered with alerts. Lines of code scrolled rapidly across the central operations screen, the network blinking between yellow and crimson. Inside Orion Airways glass headquarters in downtown Manhattan, the executive ethics console, a system few ever touched, suddenly illuminated with a single, flashing message. Tier 1 Red Protocol initiated. For most companies, this was just a theoretical scenario buried in compliance manuals. For Orion Airways, it was a nightmare unfolding in real time. In the command room, analysts scrambled to make sense of the data. "It's not a cyber attack," one of them said breathlessly. "It's an authorized trigger from the Ethos network. Someone with top clearance initiated it." "Who demanded CFO Garrett Hale?" Pacing beside the digital display. His voice cracked with disbelief. A junior analyst hesitated, then pointed at the screen. "It's coming from Solaris Tech. User authorization, Dr. Ayanna Brooks." The room fell silent. Garrett's jaw tightened. "She's one of our principal investors," he said slowly. "This can't be right. Why would she?" He didn't finish the sentence. because the truth was already crawling through his mind like cold electricity. At that same moment, on the tarmac outside, ground crews halted all fueling and servicing operations for Flight OA-277. A message had come directly from Orion's Compliance Division: freeze all outgoing flights under review. Even the maintenance supervisors looked confused, staring at each other through the glare of the morning sun. Inside the cabin, passengers were growing restless. A woman in row 4 complained loudly that she would miss her meeting in San Francisco. A man across the aisle called out to Kendra, asking for updates. She could only offer vague reassurances that technical checks were underway. Ayanna sat motionless, her gaze fixed on the fading horizon. The world outside moved in chaos, but she remained still, her calm now almost otherworldly. She could feel the momentum building beyond her reach. The system she'd helped design was awakening fully. The Ethos Integrity System wasn't built to punish individuals. It was built to correct imbalance. It analyzed transactions, communication logs, employee records, and customer reports, calculating whether a corporation's behavior aligned with federal ethics mandates. When triggered under Tier 1, it did more than flag. It froze financial arteries, halting the flow of capital until the investigation concluded. In DEC. Malcolm Reyes watched as the dashboard turned completely red. The scale of the freeze shocked even him. "This is bigger than I thought," he muttered, adjusting his tie as he dialed through to the FAA liaison. "FAA Ethics Division. Agent Porter speaking." "This is Reyes from Solaris Tech," Malcolm said. "Confirming Orion Airways red flag activation under Clause 7. Passenger equity breach." "Confirmed," Porter replied. "All ESG-linked funding streams have been suspended pending investigation. Estimated freeze $1.3 billion. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly. The number was enormous. He knew what that meant. Within an hour, the entire airline industry would know too. Onboard O207. The cabin lights flickered again. The captain's voice returned, noticeably more tense. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Due to a systems review requested by operations, we'll be returning to the gate. We appreciate your patience." The murmurs rose into full whispers now. Someone said, "Is this a bomb threat?" Another muttered, "I knew something felt off." Kendra Miles walked quickly toward the front, her pulse pounding. She wanted answers, but every time she tried to reach headquarters, her headset returned the same automated tone: access restricted under review. Her authority, her control was slipping through her fingers. As she passed row 2, she caught sight of Ayanna again. The woman hadn't moved. She sat like a figure carved from still water, her reflection framed in sunlight, calm in a storm no one else understood. Kendra hesitated. "Dr. Brooks, do you know what's going on?" Ayanna looked up slowly. "Yes," she said, "I do." The simplicity of her answer unnerved Kendra more than anything else. She forced a laugh that sounded thin. "Right. You must, fly often, then." Ayanna's eyes softened, but there was no warmth in them. Often enough to recognize when something needs to change. Before Kendra could respond, a chime sounded. The cabin doors opened, and 2 uniformed FAA officers stepped inside. Their presence drew a collective gasp from the passengers. They didn't look angry, just serious, official, purposeful. One of them approached Kendra. "Ms. Miles." "Yes." "You'll need to step off the aircraft with us." Her stomach dropped. "I don't understand. Is this about—" "Please, ma'am." "Now." Kendra's mouth opened, but no sound came. She turned once toward Ayanna, who was watching quietly, then followed the officers toward the jet bridge. The murmur of the passengers swelled as she disappeared through the door. Talia Green watched the entire exchange with wide eyes. She'd never seen anything like it, an entire flight frozen mid-morning, all because of something that had started as a single argument at boarding. She approached Diana cautiously. "Dr. Brooks, is everything going to be okay?" Diana turned her head, her tone gentle. "Eventually, yes, but not for everyone." Talia blinked, unsure what that meant. Meanwhile, the ripple effect was spreading. In boardrooms across the country, financial terminals flashed red as compliance locks initiated. At ESG Global Bank, risk officers scrambled to calculate exposure. At the FAA's Central Command, a meeting was convened under emergency order. A senior official looked at the report projected on the wall. "Who the hell is Dr. Diana Brooks?" Another answered quietly, "She's not just a passenger. She's the architect of the ethos integrity framework." The realization landed like a stone in deep water, silent, irreversible, and heavy. Back on the ground at JFK, Garrett Hale from Orion's headquarters arrived in a black sedan. He stormed toward the operations building, shouting orders into his phone. "Find out why our assets are frozen. Who authorized this?" A nervous compliance officer met him at the door, handing over a printed notice. The letterhead bore the seal of the Federal Ethics Commission. Tier 1, Red Alert Non-Compliance Passenger Equity Violation under review. Garrett's hands trembled as he read the name at the bottom. Filed by Dr. Diana Brooks. "God," he whispered. "She's one of us." Inside the plane, passengers were being instructed to disembark in stages. Diana waited until nearly everyone had left. She wasn't in a rush. The work had already begun without her. When she finally stood, Talia reached out hesitantly. "I'm sorry for what happened earlier," she said quietly. "You didn't deserve that." Diana smiled a small, tired smile that held both grace and gravity. "Thank you, Talia. Remember this moment. Sometimes change begins with one wrong act being seen by the right eyes." As she stepped off the plane, she could see flashes of commotion through the glass cameras, security, executives whispering frantically into phones. The world was beginning to realize what had just happened. The first domino had fallen. By noon, 3 major financial networks issued official freeze notices to Orion Airways. Stock tickers turned crimson. News anchors began speculating live massive compliance breach possible. Racial discrimination incident involving top investor. Malcolm watched it unfold on a muted screen in his office. He knew Diana wouldn't speak publicly, not yet. Her silence was her sharpest instrument, the one thing the world never saw coming. He opened a message thread and typed a single line. "The system is holding." Then he hit send. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, the city glowed red, reflected from thousands of digital dashboards across the country, all flashing the same word, non-compliant, and somewhere in the quiet of her hotel room. Diana sat by the window, sipping tea, watching the news scroll across the screen. Her phone buzzed with endless messages from journalists, regulators, investors. She didn't answer any of them. For now, she let the silence speak. Because tonight, the silence had already turned the lights of an empire red. By the next morning, the entire country was talking about Flight OA277. News outlets looped grainy footage taken by passengers as uniformed officers boarded the plane, their voices low but serious. The headlines were sharp and fast. Major airline under ethics investigation. CEO passenger triggers federal review. 1.3 B in assets frozen overnight. It was everywhere from breakfast television to late-night radio. But amidst the noise, only a handful of people truly understood what had happened. In her quiet hotel suite overlooking Manhattan, Dr. Ayanna Brooks sat near the window, watching the city wake beneath her. She wasn't wearing a suit now, just a simple gray robe and her reading glasses, a steaming cup of coffee at her side. Her phone vibrated constantly on the table, messages lighting up the screen one after another, requests for comment, interview offers, investors begging for reassurance. She ignored them all. The morning light caught the edge of a framed photograph near the nightstand. Her parents, smiling in front of a small church in Birmingham, decades ago. Her father's arm around her shoulders, his words echoing from memory integrity, "Isn't about being loud, Ayanna. It's about standing still while the world shakes." She took a long breath. The world was shaking now. Down in the lobby, the chaos was already spilling in. Cameras flashed through glass doors as reporters swarmed, hoping for a glimpse. Security escorted visitors in and out of conference rooms, each person looking slightly more nervous than the last. At Orion Airways headquarters, Garrett Hale hadn't slept in 20 hours. He stood before a wall of monitors, each displaying live feeds of stock prices, regulatory updates, and social media trends. His tie was loosened, his voice hoarse. "How bad is it?" he asked the compliance director. "Bad," she said plainly. The Ethos Network expanded its review. They've flagged 43 internal communications between gate staff and flight operations referencing profiling incidents. It's not just one flight. Garrett, this goes deep. Garrett rubbed his temples. So? She knew. She designed the system. The director replied. She didn't just know, she saw it coming. In D.C., Malcolm Reyes sat in a government conference room, surrounded by FIA officials and legal advisors. On the screen before them glowed the words Tier 1 Ethics Lock Active. He'd already explained the context twice, how the trigger was not a personal act of retaliation, but a formal invocation of regulatory oversight. She didn't file a complaint, Malcolm clarified. She submitted data. The system did the rest. One of the FAA commissioners leaned back, skeptical. So this was automatic triggered? Yes, but deliberate. Malcolm said, Ayanna Brooks holds authority as a certified ethics architect. Her access allows her to initiate emergency review if she identifies systemic misconduct affecting public equity. The commissioner whistled softly, and she did it from her seat on the plane. Malcolm nodded. With one call. Outside the closed doors, whispers spread like wildfire through the halls of government. Words like precedent, reform, and accountability mechanism echoed faintly. Meanwhile, Talia Green sat alone in her small apartment, watching the morning news replay. Her face appeared briefly in the footage, just for a second, behind Ayanna's seat. Her expression caught between fear and understanding. The reporter's voice narrated over the clip. Sources confirm a passenger in business class was wrongfully challenged over her seating credentials before the airline's systems went offline. Talia turned off the TV and sat in silence. She'd been part of that moment. She'd seen it unfold, helpless to stop it. Her stomach tightened with a strange mix of guilt and awe. She picked up her phone and hesitated before typing a message. Talia, Dr. Brooks, I just wanted to say thank you for not yelling, for how you handled it. It made me think about a lot. She hit send and stared at the screen until it blinked. Delivered. Back in the hotel room. Ayanna saw the message pop up. She smiled faintly and typed back a short reply. Ayanna's silence can be louder than anger. Talia, I'm glad you listened. She set the phone aside and returned her attention to the city. Outside, the world was buzzing, but inside, she felt an unexpected calm. Later that morning, she received a call from Malcolm. His tone was steady but filled with quiet gravity. The FAA just opened a formal inquiry. The freeze stands. Orion stock has dropped 22%. They're panicking. Ayanna leaned back in her chair. Good. Maybe panic is what they needed. Are you sure you want to stay quiet? Reporters are shaping the story their way. She smiled softly. Let them talk. The truth doesn't need a headline. It needs a record. Malcolm hesitated, then said, They're requesting a meeting. Orion's board. They want to speak with you privately. Ayanna looked at the skyline again, sunlight reflecting on the steel and glass. Set it up, she said. By afternoon, she was seated in a top-floor conference room at Orion headquarters. The atmosphere was cold, defensive. Garrett Hale sat across from her, flanked by two legal advisors. Cameras weren't allowed, but tension filled every inch of air between them. Garrett spoke first. Dr. Brooks, this escalation could destroy us. You've frozen over $1 billion in assets. Thousands of employees. Thousands of employees, Ayanna interrupted softly. Who deserve to work for a company that treats people like humans, not categories? Garrett clenched his jaw. This could have been handled privately. She met his gaze steadily. We tried privately for years. Nothing changed. Silence stretched. The air conditioning hummed faintly. Finally, he said, What do you want? Ayanna rested her hands on the table, fingers intertwined. Accountability, policy change, transparent audits of your staff conduct, mandatory equity retraining across all Orion operations, and a permanent public ethics board with real authority. That's impossible, one of the lawyers said sharply. It's non-negotiable, Ayanna replied. If you want the freeze lifted, reform begins now. Garrett looked at her, realizing this was no bluff. There was something in her composure steady, unbreakable, that told him resistance would only make things worse. He sighed heavily. You understand you've made enemies today? Ayanna gave a small, almost serene smile. I didn't come here to make friends. Garrett, I came here to make history. After she left, the room remained silent. None of them spoke for several minutes. Even the city outside seemed quieter somehow, as though holding its breath for what came next. That night, as the sun sank behind the Hudson, news stations ran a breaking update. Orion Airways reaches preliminary settlement with Federal Ethics Board. Full review underway. On social media, hashtags like Trauschem Seat 2A, She Belongs Here, and Os Ethos. Awakens began trending. People shared their own stories of being dismissed, profiled, or underestimated. The story had outgrown its origin. It was no longer just about a flight. It was about a system finally facing itself. In her room, Ayanna closed her laptop and turned off the lights. She stood by the window again, looking out at the skyline glowing in soft amber. For the first time in years, she felt something that wasn't anger or determination. It was peace, the kind that comes from knowing that the ground really had shifted. Her phone buzzed once more. A final message from Malcolm appeared. The freeze is still active, but change is in motion. Proud of you. Ayanna smiled faintly and typed one last reply before setting the phone aside. It was never about me, Malcolm. It was about what comes after. And as the city pulsed with restless light, she whispered into the quiet, let them rebuild it better. Outside, the world kept turning, but nothing would ever move quite the same way again. The city hadn't slept. Overnight, the story of Flight OA217 had become something much bigger than a single confrontation at an airport. It was on every television, every social feed, every talk show. Morning anchors dissected it with feigned neutrality, while the public seethed and rallied. A black woman CEO humiliated on her own airline. One headline read, while another declared, "Justice at 30,000 feet. How one act of calm changed corporate America." At 6 a.m. in the heart of Manhattan, a crowd gathered outside Orion Airways headquarters. Protesters held up signs that read, "Accountability takes flight and seat 2A never again." Cameras flashed. News drones hovered above like silent witnesses. The world was watching. And for the first time in its history, Orion was being forced to see itself through someone else's eyes. Inside the building, executives shuffled between conference rooms. Garrett Hale had barely left his office since the meeting with Ayanna. His suit was wrinkled, his face pale, and the once confident rhythm of his voice now carried the tremor of exhaustion. "We need to end this fast," he said to his legal team. "Every minute this goes on, our stock bleeds another half point. We can't sustain this level of exposure." A junior analyst interrupted softly. "Sir, the Ethos Review just expanded to include our partner vendors and training affiliates. The scope, it's widening." Garrett slammed his palm on the table. "Of course it's widening. That's what happens when someone builds a system designed to expose everything." The room went silent. Meanwhile, on the 12th floor of a nearby office building, Ayanna and Malcolm sat across from representatives from the FA and the Federal Ethics Commission. The air was thick with tension, not hostility, just the quiet weight of history moving. Commissioner Porter began the meeting with her usual calm precision. "Dr. Brooks, our review team has verified the ethos activation was lawful and justified. However, Orion's leadership is requesting a mediation hearing before the full federal report is published." Ayanna folded her hands. "They're worried about optics, not ethics," she said softly. Malcolm glanced at her, then back at the officials. "With respect, Commissioner, my client's intention was never to destroy a company. It was to hold one accountable." Porter nodded. "Understood. But you've triggered something unprecedented. Other corporations are calling us, asking if the same could happen to them. There's talk in Congress about expanding this kind of oversight nationwide." Ayanna leaned back slightly. "Then maybe the system is finally doing what it was meant to do." The commissioner studied her. "You understand what kind of power you've just unleashed?" Ayanna met her gaze, steady as ever. "Power without conscience is chaos. Conscience without power is silence. I prefer balance." For a moment, no one spoke. Across town, in a small apartment in Queens, Talia Green sat at her kitchen table scrolling through her phone. Overnight, her inbox had filled with messages, some kind, some cruel. A few called her brave for standing near Ayanna that day. Others accused her of complicity. She didn't know how to feel. When the airline called, she almost didn't answer. "Ms. Green, this is HR," the voice said. "We'll need you to report to headquarters today for an internal review." She swallowed hard. "Am I in trouble?" "Not necessarily. Just be honest about what happened." Her hands trembled slightly as she hung up. She thought of Ayanna's words. Silence can be louder than anger. For years, she'd done what she was told, smiled when others crossed lines, kept her head down when it mattered most. But maybe silence didn't have to mean surrender. She stood, straightened her blazer, and whispered to herself, "No more fear." At the same time, Garrett's assistant hurried into his office, holding a tablet. "Sir, you need to see this." The screen showed live footage of Ayanna entering the FAA building with Malcolm by her side. Cameras followed them as reporters shouted questions. One reporter's voice rose above the crowd. "Dr. Brooks, do you think this will change how airlines treat passengers of color?" Ayanna paused before entering the building. She turned slightly toward the cameras, her tone calm but resolute. "Change doesn't start with companies," she said. "It starts with people who stop pretending they don't see." The clip went viral within an hour. Her words became a rallying cry. Hashtags multiplied, memes circulated, even late-night hosts quoted her on air. What began as humiliation had become a symbol of resilience. Inside the FAA building, the mediation session began at noon. Representatives from Orion, Solaris Tech, and the Federal Ethics Commission filled the long oval table. Garrett Hale looked worn. His confidence cracked. "Dr. Brooks," he began, "on behalf of Orion Airways, I want to apologize for what happened. It was unacceptable. The flight attendant responsible has been suspended, pending further investigation." Ayanna's expression remained unchanged. "Suspension isn't reform, Mr. Hale. It's reaction." He sighed. "Then what do you want from us?" Ayanna looked at him for a long moment, her tone quiet but piercing. "I want you to stop treating diversity like a checkbox and start treating it like a responsibility." Garrett rubbed his forehead. "You're asking us to rebuild the entire corporate structure. I'm asking you to make sure no one has to live what I did," she replied. Malcolm added, "Solaris Tech is prepared to assist Orion in establishing independent oversight through the Ethos framework. The system can audit equity compliance quarterly. You'll regain access to your funds once the ethics board approves." Garrett stared at him, incredulous. "You want us to let you monitor us?" Ayanna's voice was firm. "Not me ethics. Transparency doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to everyone affected by your choices." There was a pause, heavy with realization. Garrett exhaled slowly, resignation finally softening his tone. "Then we'll cooperate." Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the city in amber light. The crowd waiting beyond the building erupted in applause when Ayanna and Malcolm stepped outside. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed, but she only smiled faintly and waved once before leaving. That night, Ayanna returned to her hotel, exhausted but at peace. She turned on the television, watching as a journalist summarized the day's outcome under the new agreement. Orion Airways will undergo federal ethics supervision for 2 years and adopt the Ethos compliance system. Industry experts are calling this the beginning of a new era in corporate transparency. She muted the TV and sat quietly, letting the words sink in. It wasn't victory, she felt it was relief, tempered by the awareness of what still lay ahead. Her phone buzzed with another message from Talia. "I spoke up today. Told the truth in the review. It felt good." Ayanna smiled softly and typed back, "That's how change begins, one voice at a time." Across the city, Garrett stood at his office window, staring at the skyline. For the first time, he understood what it meant to lose control and why maybe that was necessary. He didn't hate Ayanna anymore. He respected her. She'd held up a mirror he could no longer turn away from, and somewhere, in an office filled with glowing monitors, the Ethos system recorded its final log entry for the day compliance under review. Progress detected. The lights of the city shimmered in the reflection of the glass, soft and endless. The world had not changed overnight, but something irreversible had begun, and in that stillness, the story of Seat 2A became something more than viral. It became a blueprint for justice in silence. 3 days after the settlement, the storm hadn't passed. It had only changed direction. What began as a single incident on Flight OA-217 was now rippling through every corner of the aviation world. Business schools, human rights organizations, and media outlets were all dissecting it. Some called Ayanna a hero, others a disruptor. And yet, amid the chaos, she remained silent. She wasn't interested in fame or praise. She had seen too many movements dissolve under the weight of celebrity. What mattered to her wasn't applause. It was reform that lasted beyond the news cycle. The world was moving faster now. The FAA had launched the Seat 2A initiative, a nationwide ethics monitoring program inspired by her action. Airlines scrambled to issue statements promising inclusivity. Shareholders demanded transparency. For once, accountability wasn't just a slogan, it was survival. But not everyone was celebrating. Behind the glass walls of Orion's boardroom, discontent simmered. Some executives felt betrayed, others humiliated. Garrett Hale, still processing the fallout, faced whispers of resignation. The CEO, Diana Mercer, had returned from an overseas trip only to find her company under federal watch. She had built Orion with her own hands, and now it stood on the edge of collapse. In a tense meeting, she addressed her leadership team. "We can't undo what happened," she said, "but we can decide what kind of company rises from this." One director scoffed. "Rises. We're bleeding investors by the hour." Diana's tone sharpened. "Then we rebuild differently. If that means tearing down what doesn't serve integrity, so be it." Garrett glanced at her, surprised by the steel in her voice. For the first time in years, he saw a leader willing to face the truth instead of hiding behind profit margins. That same morning, Ayanna sat at a small cafe near the Hudson River, a steaming mug of tea before her. The hum of the city filled the background car horns, laughter, the rustle of newspapers. Across from her sat Malcolm, flipping through his notes on a tablet. "Every network wants you," he said. "Oprah, CNN, even a TED Talk invitation. They're calling this the Brooks Doctrine." Ayanna smiled faintly. "The world doesn't need another doctrine, Malcolm. It needs people who actually listen." He chuckled softly. "Still, you've started something unstoppable. Did you see this?" He turned the tablet toward her. A headline read FAA to launch federal oversight program based on ethos framework. She read it quietly, eyes thoughtful. That's bigger than any apology Orion could offer. Malcolm leaned back. "You know what the irony is. The system you built to monitor ethics just forced an entire industry to look in the mirror." Ayanna stirred her tea, her reflection shimmering in the surface. Maybe that's how change works. Not through anger, but reflection. At that moment, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Dr. Brooks, this is Diana Mercer. I'd like to meet." "No press, no lawyers. Just talk." Ayanna hesitated, then looked up at Malcolm. "It's time," she said simply. That afternoon, she arrived at Orion's headquarters through a side entrance to avoid the cameras. The elevator hummed softly as it rose to the top floor. When the doors opened, Diana was already waiting. She looked exhausted lines under her eyes, her posture heavy, but there was something sincere in her expression. "Thank you for coming," Diana began, extending a hand. Ayanna shook it. "I wasn't sure if this was about peace or damage control. Maybe both," Diana admitted. "You exposed something ugly in us, but I think maybe you also saved us." Ayanna studied her for a moment, unsure whether to believe it. Saved you? How Diana walked toward the window, looking out over the skyline. You reminded me why I started this company, to connect people, not divide them. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. You forced us to remember. The two women sat, and for the first time since the scandal began, there was no tension, just two leaders, human and tired, speaking the same language of truth. I've approved the reforms, Diana said. Full ethics retraining, transparent audits, community outreach programs, and, she paused, I'd like to establish a partnership with Solaris Tech to integrate your ethos monitoring permanently, not as punishment, but as collaboration. Ayanna didn't speak immediately. The offer was unexpected. You're sure your board will agree to that? Diana smiled faintly. They don't have a choice anymore. Ayanna leaned back. Considering. Then let's make sure it's real. Real change, not PR gloss. You have my word, Diana said. As Ayanna left the office, the tension that had followed her for days began to ease. The air outside felt lighter, the city somehow quieter. That evening, she attended a small community gathering at a high school in Harlem, a mentorship event she'd quietly sponsored for years. The auditorium was filled with students, teachers, and a few local reporters. When the host introduced her, the room erupted in applause, but Ayanna raised her hand, smiling gently. Please, she said, let's talk, not cheer. She walked to the podium and looked out at the faces before her, young, curious, hopeful. People keep asking me how I stayed calm on that plane, she began. But calm doesn't mean weak. It means knowing who you are, even when someone else tries to tell you otherwise. The students listened in silence. You don't need to shout to be heard, she continued. Sometimes the world needs quiet to understand what's wrong. A girl in the front row raised her hand. Do you forgive them? Ayanna smiled softly. Forgiveness isn't saying it's okay. It's saying I won't carry your mistake on my back anymore. That's how I move forward. Applause rippled through the room, gentle, heartfelt, outside, as the evening breeze swept across the streets. Ayanna walked alone for a while. She passed a newspaper stand where her own face stared back at her from the front page. She barely recognized the woman in the photo, composed, dignified, almost iconic. But to her, she was just someone who refused to move from the seat she'd earned. Later that night, Malcolm called. You did it, he said. The FAA just confirmed the Seat 2A initiative. It'll roll out across 87 airports this fall. Ayanna closed her eyes, smiling to herself. Then maybe this is what justice sounds like, not noise, but steady progress. Before hanging up, she added quietly, let's make sure the next generation never needs another 2A moment to be heard. The next morning, the front page of the New York Times carried a single headline, From Silence to Systems, How One Woman's Calm Changed the Skies, and below it, in smaller text, a quote from Ayanna's speech. Calm isn't surrender, it's control. Across America, millions read those words over breakfast, coffee in hand, thinking maybe for the first time about what it means to belong, to stand firm, to be seen. The quiet revolution had begun, and it was only just taking flight. Autumn settled over the city, soft and golden, washing the glass towers of Manhattan in amber light. Months had passed since the incident on Flight OA-217, and yet the world still spoke her name. Not in outrage now, but in reverence. Dr. Ayanna Brooks had become an emblem of grace under pressure, of reform through quiet power. But for her, life had returned to a quieter rhythm. She no longer checked headlines each morning. She'd stopped counting interviews she turned down. The noise had faded, leaving behind what truly mattered: change. Real, measurable, lasting change. At Orion Airways, reform wasn't just a promise written on glossy brochures. It had begun to breathe. Diversity initiatives were no longer symbolic panels, but full-fledged programs. Anonymous employee surveys replaced scripted PR statements. The ethos monitoring system hummed quietly in the background, a silent guardian ensuring that dignity wasn't optional anymore. It was operational policy. Garrett Hale had resigned 2 weeks after the settlement. Officially, he cited personal reasons. Unofficially, he told Diana Mercer, "You were right. It's time someone else builds what I broke." Diana accepted his resignation without bitterness. She knew guilt had become his teacher, and sometimes that was enough. Diana herself had changed too. Her face appeared at employee forums, not press events. She listened more. Her once clinical tone had softened, replaced by something real. When she spoke about transparency, it no longer sounded like a memo. It sounded like conviction. Ayanna watched all this from a distance, neither claiming credit nor demanding acknowledgement. Her company, Solaris Tech, had grown exponentially since the ethos system went federal, but she refused to let expansion dull purpose. She reminded her team constantly, "We don't build systems to punish. We build them to protect." On a quiet Tuesday morning, she sat by the window of her D.C. office, sunlight pooling across stacks of documents. The city hummed below lawmakers debating new corporate ethics laws, journalists discussing the Brooks Standard. She sipped her coffee and smiled faintly at the irony. The system she'd designed in a quiet lab years ago had now outgrown even her. Her assistant, Nina, entered softly. "You have a visitor," she said. "A Miss Talia Green." Ayanna's expression warmed. "Send her in." Moments later, Talia stepped inside, dressed neatly but with the nervousness of someone carrying something fragile inside her. It had been months since that day on the plane, but Ayanna still recognized the mix of vulnerability and strength in her eyes. "Dr. Brooks," Talia said, "I wanted to thank you in person." Ayanna gestured for her to sit. "You already did, with your courage. You spoke the truth when it mattered." Talia shook her head. "It wasn't courage. It was shame. I stayed silent too long." Ayanna looked at her kindly. "Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's a pause before change." Talia took a deep breath. "After the investigation, I was reassigned. New department training and ethics oversight. They said I'd be helping implement the ethos modules for staff. I wanted you to know. The program's working. People talk differently now. The tone has shifted." "That's good," Ayanna said softly. "That means you're teaching more than compliance. You're teaching empathy." Talia smiled faintly. "I don't think I'll ever forget that day. The look on your face when she told you to move. You didn't fight back. You didn't argue. You just looked calm. How did you do that?" Ayanna leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting toward the skyline. "Because I learned long ago that power doesn't have to shout. It just has to stand." Talia nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "You changed my life, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that carried weight and peace at the same time. Later that afternoon, as Ayanna left the office, she received a call from Diana Mercer. "Ayanna, we're hosting an industry summit next month. We'd like you to speak about ethics, leadership, whatever you choose." Ayanna hesitated. "You don't need me to speak. The work speaks for itself." Diana's voice softened. "It would mean something for people to hear it from you. You gave us a second chance to be decent." Ayanna thought for a moment. "If I speak, it won't be about me. It'll be about every person who's been told they don't belong. That's exactly what the world needs, Diana replied. A month later, the summit took place in Atlanta, a gathering of CEOs, regulators, educators, and aviation professionals from across the nation. The hall was filled with quiet anticipation as Ayanna walked onto the stage. No spotlight, no fanfare, just her, the microphone, and a sea of expectant faces. She began simply. When I boarded Flight OA to Samoan, I didn't plan to make history. I planned to get home. A murmur of soft laughter rippled through the audience. I wasn't looking for confrontation. She continued, but when it found me, I had a choice to fight with anger or to stand with grace. I chose stillness, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I knew the system would hear silence louder than shouting. She paused, scanning the crowd. The truth is, injustice rarely looks like monsters. It looks like small moments in assumption, a tone, a gate agent's smirk. It hides in politeness. It thrives in silence. But so can justice if we decide to give it voice. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every word she spoke felt deliberate, steady, like stones placed in a path that others could follow. Ethics isn't a rule book, she said. It's a mirror. And when we're brave enough to look into it, really look, we might not always like what we see, but that's where growth begins. When she finished, the applause was not wild or explosive. It was slow, sustained, almost reverent. People stood, not just in respect, but in understanding. That night, Ayanna walked alone through the quiet streets of Atlanta. The air was warm, the city lights gentle. She passed a mural freshly painted on the side of a building, a woman sitting calmly in an airplane seat. Looking out the window, beneath it, 3 words. She stayed seated. Ayanna stopped for a moment, staring at the mural, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. She hadn't asked for this legacy, but maybe, she thought, some stories choose you. Her phone buzzed a message from Malcolm. Congratulations. The Seat 2A initiative is expanding globally next quarter. You've changed aviation forever. She smiled softly, typing back, not forever. Just enough to make people think before they act. The rest is up to them. The wind picked up, brushing her hair across her face. Above her, a plane roared through the night sky, lights blinking steady against the dark. She watched it disappear into the horizon and whispered to herself, the sky remembers. And perhaps, in some quiet way, it did. Winter swept across Washington, D.C. with soft rain and slow skies, the kind that made everything feel suspended in gray calm. In a quiet corner office overlooking the Potomac, Dr. Ayanna Brooks sat surrounded by papers, blueprints, and a map dotted with glowing markers, each one representing an airport now operating under the Seat 2A ethics system. There were 87 of them so far, stretching from Seattle to Miami, with plans to expand to Europe and Asia by the end of the year. It had been nearly a year since Flight OA to Washington, but the world still echoed with its consequences. Laws had changed. Companies had learned. But more importantly, people had started to look at one another differently, more aware, less indifferent. Ayanna turned from the map when her phone buzzed. It was Malcolm. "Morning," she answered softly. His voice came through steady, with that familiar mixture of admiration and exhaustion. "Morning, Dr. Brooks. The Senate Ethics Committee just confirmed it. Seat 2A will be adopted as a federal aviation standard. They're naming it the Brooks Clause." Ayanna chuckled quietly. "I told them not to do that." "I know," Malcolm said, smiling through the phone, "but they're doing it anyway." She exhaled slowly, letting the news sink in. "So that's it. Then, it's done." No, he said. It's beginning. Ayanna leaned back in her chair, eyes on the skyline. You always know what to say, don't you? I've learned from the best, Malcolm replied. But seriously, Ayanna, what you've done, it's changed everything. People don't even realize how deep it goes. There's accountability in places that never had it before. Ayanna smiled faintly. The system only works if people do. She ended the call and stood, walking to the window. Snow had started to fall, light and hesitant, down below. She could see the river's surface ripple in the cold wind. She thought about her father, about his words the night she got her first engineering job. The world will test your worth, but don't hand it the pen to write your story. That morning, she received an invitation, one that would bring her back to where it all began. Orion Airways was holding an event at JFK to commemorate the launch of their new Equity and Inclusion initiative. Diana Mercer had personally written to invite her. Ayanna hesitated before replying. Part of her wanted to stay away from the place that had started everything. But another part of her, perhaps the stronger part, knew she had to go. Closure wasn't just about endings. It was about arriving differently at the same door. 3 days later, she arrived at JFK. The air was crisp, the crowds bustling. Nothing about the terminal looked different, but everything felt different. Screens flashed messages about fairness, empathy, equality. The Orion logo gleamed under banners that read, "The sky belongs to everyone." Diana met her at the gate, dressed in a simple navy suit. No cameras, no press, just sincerity. "You came," she said, almost relieved. Ayanna smiled. "You asked." They walked together down the concourse, their footsteps echoing off the polished floor. "When I took this job," Diana said, "I thought leadership meant control. You showed me it means responsibility." Ayanna's tone was gentle. Control fades. Responsibility lasts. They stopped at Gate 27, the very gate where everything began. The same corridor, the same light streaming through glass. For a moment, Ayanna felt her chest tighten. She could almost hear it again. "This cabin isn't for you." But then, just as quickly, she breathed out and let it go. A new crew stood nearby, waiting to greet her. Among them was Talia Green, now wearing a supervisor's badge. Her smile was bright and genuine. "Dr. Brooks," she said, "welcome aboard." Ayanna's eyes softened. "I see they finally put the right people in charge." Talia laughed lightly. "We're trying. Every training session starts with your story. We tell new hires what happened not to shame anyone, but to remind them why this matters." Ayanna nodded. That's how change becomes culture. As they boarded the aircraft, Diana turned to her. "Would you like to sit?" Ayanna glanced toward seat 2A. For a moment, her reflection shimmered in the window again, overlapping with the memory of that morning long ago. She smiled softly. "No," she said. "That seat belongs to someone else now." She gestured toward a young girl standing nearby, maybe 12 years old, boarding with her mother. The girl looked nervous, clutching her passport tightly. Ayanna bent down slightly and said, "You like the window seat?" The girl nodded shyly. "Then take it," Ayanna said. "It's yours." The girl's face lit up as she sat down, pressing her hands against the glass. Her mother mouthed a quiet, "Thank you." Ayanna stepped back, her heart full. That was the moment she realized legacy isn't about the names written in systems or laws. It's about the space we leave for others to sit comfortably where we once stood, uncertain. Later, during the event, Diana gave a short speech to a modest crowd of employees and journalists. We learned that humility can be the beginning of strength, she said, and that listening, truly listening, can save an entire industry. She turned toward Ayanna. We owe that to one woman who taught us that stillness can move mountains. Applause filled the gate area, warm and human. Ayanna didn't step forward to take credit. She simply smiled and clapped along with everyone else. After the ceremony, as she prepared to leave, Talia approached her once more. You know, she said, every time I train new recruits, I tell them something you said to me that day, that silence can be louder than anger. Some of them don't understand it right away, but when they see how it changes the way they treat people, they get it. Ayanna touched her arm lightly. Keep teaching them, not the system, the heart behind it. Outside, the sky had cleared into a soft winter blue. The planes lined the runway like silver birds waiting to take flight. Ayanna stood for a moment, watching one rise into the air, its wings cut through sunlight, clean and effortless. Malcolm had once told her that systems don't change people, people change systems. And as she stood there, feeling the hum of the world move around her, she knew he was right. The Ethos Network, the Seat 2A Initiative, the Brooks Clause. Those were structures, but what truly mattered was something simpler. The courage to stay seated when the world told you to move. That evening, she returned to Hyang, stepping into her quiet home where a single lamp glowed beside her father's photograph. She poured herself a cup of tea, sat down by the window, and watched snow drift past the streetlights. The city below buzzed with life, unaware that history was still being written in small, unremarkable moments in airports, classrooms, boardrooms, and whispered apologies. Ayanna smiled to herself, her reflection blending into the night outside. Somewhere across the ocean, another plane lifted into the air, carrying with it the legacy of a woman who had once chosen not to move. And as the snow thickened and the sky turned silver, one truth lingered quietly in the world. She'd changed. Some revolutions don't roar. They breathe. The first anniversary of the Flight OA-217 incident arrived quietly, without fanfare or press conferences. But beneath the stillness, something powerful moved, a transformation that had taken root far beyond airports or boardrooms. The Ethos Network now governed not only aviation, but also major transport and corporate sectors. Schools were adapting its ethical framework for leadership programs. Lawmakers called it the invisible compass of accountability. For Dr. Ayanna Brooks, it was never about power. It was about peace. And peace, she knew, required maintenance like an engine constant, deliberate attention. She stood in her Solaris Tech office overlooking a fog-covered D.C. morning. The skyline blurred into soft shades of silver and white. Her assistant, Nina, entered, holding a folder. Updates from the European rollout. She said, Frankfurt and Heathrow just went live last night. Singapore's next. Ayanna took the folder, flipping through the neatly printed pages. Good. Make sure the training manuals include the empathy modules. I don't want this to become another checkbox exercise. Nina nodded. Already done. You've got a video call with the World Ethics Council at 10. Ayanna smiled faintly. Another council, another conversation. She sat back in her chair, letting the hum of the city fade into the background. Sometimes, even success felt heavy, because for every policy written, there were still those who hadn't been seen or heard. And that, she thought, was the work that never ended. Her phone buzzed again this time, an email notification. Subject line, from Talia Green Update. Ayanna opened it. Talia's words were earnest and warm, written late at night. Dr. Brooks, we just finished our first round of international crew training under the ethos standard. For the first time, I saw something shift, not fear of being punished, but pride in being better. I think they're starting to get it. Also, one of the new attendants asked me to thank you. She said your story gave her courage to stand up for a passenger yesterday. She didn't let history repeat itself. With gratitude. Talia Ayana felt her throat tighten. She leaned back, staring at the screen for a long moment before replying simply, "That's the legacy that matters. Keep leading." That afternoon, she prepared for her meeting with the World Ethics Council. The members represented industries across continents, finance, health, energy, tech, all now adopting systems modeled after ethos. When her face appeared on screen, the moderator greeted her warmly. "Dr. Brooks, thank you for joining us. Your model has become the foundation for our new Global Compliance Charter. We'd like to hear your insights on sustainable ethical leadership." Ayana spoke with her characteristic calm. Sustainability isn't just about energy or economics. It's about trust. If systems fail, people, they collapse eventually. My advice: teach empathy as infrastructure, not as idealism. The moderator smiled. Beautifully said. And your thoughts on automation and bias in AI? Ayana considered the question carefully. Technology reflects its creator. The only way to prevent bias is to confront it in ourselves first. Machines don't discriminate. People do. The session ended with applause, though Ayana didn't bask in it. She turned off her camera and sat quietly for a while, listening to the faint hum of her computer. The world had listened to her for a year now, but she hoped they would start listening to one another. That evening, she met Malcolm at a small restaurant in Georgetown. The walls were lined with books, the lighting low and warm. He raised his glass as she sat down. "To 1 year since you changed everything." She laughed softly. "I didn't change everything. Just a few things that needed changing." He grinned. "You always downplay it. But you realize, don't you? They're teaching your story in law schools now." She raised an eyebrow. "I'd rather they teach the lesson, not the story." Malcolm leaned forward. "You can't separate them anymore. Ayana, you've become the lesson." She looked down at her glass, the reflection of the candlelight flickering inside it. "I didn't want to become anything. I just wanted to be treated fairly." Malcolm's expression softened. "And that's why people believe you." For a while, they ate in silence, comfortable and familiar. Outside, snow began to fall again, small flakes catching in the glow of streetlights. "I've been thinking," Ayana said finally, "maybe it's time I step back. Let others lead." Malcolm shook his head. "You've built something too important to walk away from." She smiled gently. "That's exactly why I should. If it can't live without me, it was never strong enough." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're not quitting, are you?" "No," she said, her voice soft but certain. "I'm passing it on." The next morning, she stood before her team at Solaris Tech. Engineers, analysts, and researchers filled the room, some who'd been with her since the beginning, others who joined after the headlines. "I started this company to build fair systems," she began. "But systems mean nothing if they don't build fair people. I've led ethos as far as I can. Now it's your turn." There were murmurs, a few shocked faces, even tears, but she smiled reassuringly. "Change needs new hands. I trust yours." After the meeting, Nina found her in her office, staring out the window again. "You're really doing it, aren't you?" Ayana nodded. "It's time. What will you do now?" Ayana turned, her smile calm and steady. "Live? Travel? Maybe finally take a flight where I don't have to think about ethics reports." Nina laughed softly. "You've earned that." A few weeks later, Ayana did just that. No cameras, no press, just her and a small suitcase. Her destination, Cape Town, South Africa, a place she'd always wanted to see, but never had time for. As she boarded the plane, she glanced briefly at her ticket. C2A. She smiled, shaking her head slightly at the coincidence. When she sat down, the young flight attendant greeted her warmly. "Good afternoon, Ms. Brooks. Welcome aboard. If you need anything, please let me know." Ayana looked up, surprised. "You know me?" The attendant smiled. "Everyone in training learns about you. You made our jobs mean something." Ayana's eyes softened. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Then I guess it was all worth it." As the plane lifted into the clouds, she gazed out the window. The horizon glowed in streaks of orange and gold. Below her, the world looked small, but peaceful, a patchwork of cities and stories, some broken, some healing. She rested her head back and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about systems or reform or oversight. She was simply breathing, existing, free. And as the plane leveled high above the clouds, the woman who once changed the course of an entire industry smiled to herself. Because sometimes the greatest victories are invisible, the kind that live quietly in the choices of those who come after you. The sky stretched endlessly ahead, vast and forgiving. Somewhere below, people walked into airports now lined with signs reading Seat 2A standard in effect. They might never know her name, but they would feel her work in every moment of fairness, every ounce of respect, every decision made with conscience instead of convenience. And in that quiet altitude of peace, Ayana finally whispered to herself, "We did it." The clouds seemed to answer back, soft and shimmering, like applause carried by the wind. Cape Town's morning light was unlike anything Ayana had ever seen. The sun didn't rise, it poured, spilling across the ocean in ribbons of gold and pink that touched the waves like forgiveness itself. She stood on the balcony of her seaside villa, barefoot, her hair tousled by the breeze. For the first time in years, there was no phone vibrating, no meeting waiting, no statement to review, just the sound of the sea and the rhythm of her breath. She'd been in South Africa for almost 2 weeks now. Each day was slower than the one before coffee on the veranda. Long walks through the Bokop district, dinners where laughter came easily, and nobody looked at her like she was an icon. She was just Ayana. Not Dr. Brooks, CEO. Not the woman who froze 1.3B. Not the symbol of reform. Just a woman rediscovering quiet. That morning, she sat in a small cafe tucked between bright painted houses. Children ran past with kites. Vendors called out to tourists. The smell of cardamom and sugar floated through the air. Across the table from her sat an older man named Musa, a retired professor she'd met at a community lecture the week before. He had kind eyes and a voice that carried the wisdom of long patience. "You look lighter today," he said with a gentle smile. Ayana stirred her tea. "Maybe I am. It's strange. When the noise stops, you realize how loud it was all along." Musa nodded. "Silence is not emptiness, Ayana. It's space for truth to echo." She smiled faintly. "You sound like my father." "Then he was a wise man," Musa replied. They sat in comfortable quiet for a while, watching the street life unfold. A young boy approached their table selling hand-woven bracelets. Ayana bought 2, one for herself, one for Talia. As she paid him, the boy looked at her curiously. "Are you that lady from the airplane story?" he asked shyly. Ayanna blinked in surprise. You've heard about that here? He nodded eagerly. We studied it in class. My teacher said you changed the rules for everyone. Her heart softened. I didn't change them, sweetheart. I just reminded people what they should have been all along. The boy grinned and ran off, the bracelets clinking in his pocket. After he left, Musa said quietly, the world has a long memory when it comes to pain, but a short one for courage. It will forget the details of that day, but not the feeling you gave it. Ayanna nodded slowly. Maybe that's enough. Later that afternoon, she returned to her villa to find a package waiting on the porch. The label bore a familiar logo, Orion Airways. Inside was a small silver plaque engraved with the words for courage in stillness, in gratitude from the Orion family. Beneath it, a handwritten note from Diana Mercer, Ayanna. It's been 1 year since the day you changed how we see our passengers and ourselves. Orion is now the first airline certified under the Global Seat 2A standard. Every flight begins with a moment of reflection in our crew briefings, reminding us that fairness isn't a procedure, it's a choice. You taught us that. Thank you for grounding us in humanity. With respect. Diana Ayanna ran her fingers over the plaque, smiling softly. She placed it on her desk beside a framed photo of her parents. Her father's eyes seemed to shine a little brighter under the Cape Town sunlight. That evening, she decided to take a walk along the beach. The tide was low, the sand cool beneath her feet. As she walked, she thought about the strange symmetry of it all, the flight, the freeze, the chaos, the calm. How something born from humiliation had become a catalyst for dignity. How systems built by cold logic were now warmed by empathy. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. It was a message from Talia. Dr. Brooks, I just left a flight from London to Nairobi. There was an incident. An elderly woman who didn't speak English was confused about her seat. A passenger started getting impatient. One of our new attendants stepped in, offered her a translation app, and helped her settle. The passenger apologized later. The woman cried. She said it was the first time in years someone had treated her like she mattered. That's your legacy. I just thought you should know. Ayanna's eyes filled with tears she didn't fight. She typed a slow reply. That's not my legacy, Talia. That's humanity finding its way home. The sun began to set, spilling the last of its light across the water. Ayanna sat on a driftwood log, listening to the waves roll in. The horizon was endless, the ocean calm. Somewhere, thousands of feet above her, a plane cut silently through the clouds, its lights blinking faintly like a heartbeat. She imagined the people inside strangers, stories, dreams each of them carried safely, equally, without prejudice. Maybe one of them was sitting in seat 2A right now, unaware of what that number once meant. And that, she thought, was exactly how it should be. Days turned into weeks, and Ayanna's time in Cape Town stretched longer than planned. She attended community forums on education and ethics, spoke with young entrepreneurs, and even volunteered to mentor students at a local university. She found herself laughing more, sleeping better, living freely. One evening, Musa invited her to speak at a small gathering of university students. The topic was ethics in everyday life. She stood before the crowd in a modest lecture hall. No stage, no microphone, just her voice and their curiosity. I once believed ethics was about rules, she began. But rules are only meaningful if they are rooted in respect. I learned that you can build entire systems, design global standards, create laws, but if you don't see the person in front of you, you've missed the point. A student raised her hand. Do you ever regret what happened on that flight? Ayanna paused. The question lingered in the quiet. "No," she said softly. "Pain teaches faster than comfort. That day showed me that grace isn't weakness, it's clarity. Sometimes you have to let the world expose itself before it can change." After her talk, students surrounded her, eager to ask questions, take photos, shake her hand. She answered each one patiently, smiling as they told her how her story had inspired them to pursue justice in their own ways. Later that night, she walked home under the stars. The city glowed faintly below Table Mountain, its lights like scattered embers. She whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for the pain, the lessons, the healing. When she reached her villa, she found another message waiting on her phone from Malcolm this time. The UN has approved a proposal to expand the Seat 2A ethics framework to international humanitarian agencies. They're calling it Operation Equa. You started something global. Ayanna, congratulations. She read it twice, smiling. Then she wrote back. It was never about starting something, Malcolm. It was about making sure no one else gets left behind. She placed her phone down, poured herself a glass of wine, and sat by the window as the ocean shimmered in moonlight. The sound of the waves carried through the open doors a steady, patient rhythm that matched her heartbeat. And as she looked out at the infinite horizon, Ayanna Brooks, the woman who once stayed seated when the world told her to move, finally understood that her story wasn't about defiance or even justice. It was about belonging, about proving that dignity doesn't need permission to exist. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and smiled. The sky still listened, and somewhere, high above the clouds, it remembered. True power doesn't always roar sometimes. It sits in silence and lets truth do the talking. Ayanna Brooks' story reminds us that dignity isn't given by status or title. It's an unshakable choice we make, even in the face of humiliation. She didn't fight with anger. She didn't scream for attention. She simply refused to move, and in that quiet defiance, she revealed how systems can change when integrity stands its ground. For older generations, this story reflects something timeless: grace under pressure. The understanding that self-respect can speak louder than retaliation. Ayanna's calm courage shows that justice, when pursued with patience and clarity, has the power to heal rather than destroy. We all face moments when life asks, will you lower yourself to be accepted, or rise silently to be seen? The answer, as Ayanna proved, can reshape the world around you. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey with us. If Ayanna's story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the strength that lives in quiet courage. Every like, every share, and every subscription helps us bring more stories of truth, justice, and humanity to life. So please like, share, and subscribe to stay with us. Because sometimes, one story can remind the whole world what dignity really looks like.